Hi, friends. I don't know if I'm going to title this as a Chanel palette, eyeshadow and blush palette review. I wanted to come on here featuring these palettes, but also to compare them to the other base palettes I have in my collection. I saw a few comments spring up. How does it look with or compare, I should say, to the Charlotte Tilbury? Not necessarily the NARS, but I wanted to include NARS as well. And of course, the Christian Dior palette, which is not a face palette. It is a 10 eyeshadow palette, but I do use it on my face. Before we begin, however, I had to spotlight the eyes. Listen, if you have Pat's FetishEYES liquid eyeshadow in Smoldering Seduction and also have her Star Wars Golden One palette, Tatooine, this shade here with this, stop it. These go so well together. Definitely elevates just the smokiness overall from the Golden One. I have been using those like crazy. I cannot put them down. Anyway, let's get into these Chanel palettes. When I saw these leak on Instagram, I immediately made the decision that they were gonna be mine. And I'm not one to always buy luxury makeup because it's just not in my budget. As much as I would love to buy more Chanel, it just ain't gonna happen. So when something comes along from the brand that's like this, an eye and face palette, it's gonna happen. As well as the other, and my apologies, I did not practice my French before I pressed record. We have two colorways here. They retail each for $90. Some of you are like, oh, that's not so bad. Which is like, yeah, for Chanel, is not disastrous. They're fragrance free and made in Italy. Both have a suggested shelf life of 18 months. And as you can see, a baked formula. So we have the satin finish, a little bit of shimmer in there. This one is Tendresse, $9.57. And my favorite personally is $9.58 Caractere, which again, don't know if I'm saying right, please forgive me. Put the pronunciation breakdown down below. Those help immensely. I applied this over the weekend at Bays. I'll upload that short sometime this week. But what I find just wonderful about these palettes is that yes, you can use them on the eyes. We love a multifunctional moment from a palette, but more so just the nuance of shades and the texture allows for seamless layering for you to create beautiful gradients on the cheeks. What do I mean by that? Because these colors just go beautifully well together because the undertones mostly are similar, you don't find yourself encountering muddiness. For instance, if you wanted to apply this more wine shade higher on the cheekbones to create a heavier sculpt moment, you could then apply this on the bottom or this more on the cheeks. Again, it just flows well with those colors. They don't look mixed matched. They don't look out of place or color blocked weirdly on your cheeks. And also you can bring these shades higher up and through your eye crease if you wanted to carry that shade from cheeks to eyes in a way that looks draped and I think just beautiful, especially if you wanted to be more minimalistic in terms of your approach. You didn't want to apply eyeshadow, but you didn't mind having a little bit of shading on the eyes. So let me quickly go through these shades. I do have a YouTube short showing the swatches, but that's just so quick, and I'm a long form person, as you know. Just looking at the average length time of my videos, I had to come on here and talk fully about these palettes. Here we have the more wine shade, the more peach shade. I love to place this on the higher parts of my cheeks, and then you have that on the lower if you wanted a peachy moment. Isn't this shade just gorgeous? I don't even know how to categorize it or classify, I should say. It's wine, but it's a warmish wine. And then we have the designated highlight and this very lightweight toned, I guess it's more like a warmer taupe and that's the shimmer shade. So this is not going to do much on a skin tone. Obviously, that's deeper than me. Perhaps I would categorize the Tendresse palette more suitable for lighter skin tones, especially if you want to see that color show up. I do like the pink tone highlighter. For me, I can place it higher on the cheekbones, and we'll get into more demos because I actually have this palette on my cheeks. I applied this color higher on the hollows and brought it lower on the cheeks. While we're here, let's swatch first these two shades. My gosh, this is like a warm mauve, and this like a plum. So again, here is like that warm mauve and that more plummy shade. Compared to the one found in the first palette, I think this one has a little more wine, whereas this shade here, maybe a little more like reddish in the undertone. My color experts below, help me out. I know you have some great insight on this. And of course, this color here, the red, but it's not in your face and just, I can't, for lack of a better word, it's not a clumsy red. It's so elegant in terms of how it applies on the skin and how it can be manipulated. So here, that shade, and then the gold. The gold is definitely on the warmer side. So compared to the pink highlight found in the first palette, you have a more prominent pink finish there compared to a warm gold finish that, because it's still lightweight in nature, I can successfully place this shade on higher points of my cheekbones and it won't give me a weird shading, which depending on some gold highlights that I do have in my collection, I will have to place lower on my cheekbones. Otherwise, it will look like I have a shadow on the higher points of my cheeks. What I adore about this formula, as you can probably tell from the swatches, we have a baked finish. What do we love about baked finishes? The versatility, where you can apply a little bit of a heavier dose higher here on the hollows and then blend it out as you get further down towards the apples of your cheeks. That just makes for, I think, a more realistic presentation of blush, just it following the natural contours of your face, and you're able to achieve those finishes with this type of a formula where you can build the color up without it looking muddy on the skin, because that might happen depending on the formula with like a matte finish where it can look super heavy here, but you still want a heavier serving of color to provide a little bit of shaping there. Just to quickly demo, I'm taking my Sonia G Lotus Cheek, or Lotus Detail, excuse me, sorry. I'll take more of this red shade and just nudge it here into the hollows, I know, and then softly blend it down. Wrap it around my cheeks, bring it around my brow, and there we have, again, just, my goodness. I already had blush on already, so that's why it looks super intense, but my goodness, it's... And the undertone of this red, as you can see, it doesn't read as literally when blended on the skin. It just has like a beautiful color about it that naturally invokes that flushed feel on the cheeks whenever you deal with this red type of a shade. And I like to take this more mauve moment here on the center of the face. Just look how that, well, you could see better if you came in a little closer. That's enough. Look how that just meshes well with the red, okay? Because when you see this, you're like, I don't know how that's gonna, no, it works. It most definitely works. Hitting a little bit of this gold, where again, you can place it lower. Woo! Just make sure you take time to blend it out. So if you want more of a high shine finish, lower on the cheeks, you could place it here. If you want more of that high shine finish on the cheekbones, you could place it there. Again, versatile. Now I knew I was gonna go a little crazy, so whoop, let me just carefully wipe this off, as I do want to show the other palette. Who am I kidding? I need to get some Bioderma. I'm gonna take this side off as well because I feel that I would need it. You know, we need more real estate for these demos. Quickly plopping on some Haus Labs, since this is like a hybrid, skincare hybrid makeup formula. It'll provide me with a little bit of moisture and hydration, yeah? As I don't have my moisturizer at hand, I don't want dry skin, you know what I mean? And this just quickly moves across the skin where I don't have to spend a lot of time blending it out, you know, so we could have a fresh canvas to work on. Now with the lighter palette, I primarily rely on the wine shade for my sculpting needs. If I take my Lotus detail again, punch it a little higher here, and of course, just wrap it around. Another note about the formula is how just smoothly it blends on the skin. Very silky on the application. And because of the satin or baked formula, the powder just looks like your skin once you're done blending it out. It appears smooth. There's no texture. It's truly lovely. And this tone, I feel, presents more of a sophisticated delivery of blush anytime you're dealing with like this plummy wine shade. Now, if you wanted to see this color in action, I'll place it higher on the hollows here. You definitely, if you're my skin tone, will have to use maybe a denser brush to get the right amount of product. You can see a little bit, like there is a little bit of shadow there, but it's not heavy, right? And if you wanted to bring it lower, it's gonna have more of a neutral serving of color, which is cool. I would heavily rely on that shade to give me a little bit of sculpt, but would have to apply the peach for sure if I actually wanted more of a blush moment. So let me whip that here on the center of my face, and you can see just how that brightens the complexion. You get a little bit sculpt. Yeah, I get a little bit of the sculpt from this shade here. And then I brought in the peach so it could look more flushed in nature. And then on this side, I primarily have the wine shade higher on purpose just to create more of like that effect. So depending on how you wish your blush to look like on your face, what type of structure contouring moments you want on the cheeks will determine where you place the blush, what brush you use. I definitely would recommend that maybe if you wanted a little more color pickup, you would use a medium dense brush to pick up enough color so you can see it deposit on the skin well. If you want more of like a wash of color, then you would rely on a longer bristle type brush. This is Sonia's Soft Cheek. So if you wanted more of like a wrapping, I could go back into this shade just to place it all over. So of course it's not going to have the same effect as you see here like it did on this side, where I used a much smaller brush, a little more precise in that application. And if you wanted, you could use the peach shade higher, kind of overlapping the more plummy. Man, I said the other one is my favorite, but this is so pretty too. It's hard to say. And now with the pink highlight, definitely you could detect more pink, right? It's going to appear lighter on me, but I do love the color because you still see that high shine reflect despite that pinkier backdrop of color in the formula. And I can apply this low or high. It works well on any of those regions, especially if I bring it up here around the brow arch, around the temples. Okay, and I can easily use this shade through the crease, this shade through the eyes. Again, it's going to appear softer than a typical eyeshadow palette, correct? So just know that how these appear on the eyes, more like washes of color, and you have a little more control there. If you wanted to create intensity, then you could use an eye pencil, any of your favorite liquid eyeshadows, whether from Pat or Farag or Alicia. If you wanted to go more traditional with your eyeshadows, you know, especially if you wanted to downsize the makeup that you're bringing along. Let's say you are going on a trip and you just wanted to use this palette, I would then pack a shade like, let's see here, I could do Bronze Bijou, I could do Luna Rose, I could do, well, this is a little too cool. I would even argue for Platinum Bronze, most definitely. Smoldering, Smoldering has a moment in there. I actually use this palette with Lisa's Viola. So this I use with Viola because I thought that shade just matched beautifully with like the mauve moments in there. But here are a few close-ups of how the blushes look on the skin. And I think you can tell that this formula is absolutely gorgeous. I've been using these non-stop ever since I bought them from Saks, and I am pleasantly I knew they were gonna be amazing. I just wasn't ready for the colors, just the complexity these palettes have to offer with only 4 shades in each. How far you can take it, how much you could experiment with, whether on the cheeks, on the eyes as well. So that brings us to a few comparisons, and someone had brought up the Charlotte Tilbury Pillow Talk Beautifying palette. This is in the medium deep colorway, and I think we're all wondering, how does this red shade look compared to Chanel? So this is the one from the Chanel palette. Here we have from Charlotte. They are similar. You can see there, maybe the one from Chanel a little, like I detect a little more warmth in there, and the red from the Beautifying palette is a little more neutral. You have this pink shade, which this color, maybe I would say similar to the peach found in the Chanel palette, but this is more like an actual pink shade versus the peach. And then you have these highlights, which not as smooth as the Chanel highlights, 100%. These have a little more texture. They kind of serve as an overlay moment where the base is translucent, but the reflectivity definitely found in the larger particle size, I think that exists in this formula. With the like pink champagne shade, you have more of like a blush topper moment here, which is going to deliver more color. So this is a lighter pink champagne. This is more of a blush topper where you could wrap it around the apples of your cheeks. Maybe if you're deeper than me, you could wear this as a highlighter higher on the cheekbones. How do they compare? I think they are similar, especially the baked formulas. They are similar to the Chanel. I would say though, the Chanel shades, because these are matte, but because it's baked, they do leave behind a little bit of a sheen that they're not flat, but they're not shimmery either. Does that make any sense? I remember when I applied this shade, I was pleased with the color, and much like what I described with the red found in the Chanel palette, how it's very elegant in the application. It doesn't appear straight up red on your cheeks. It blends well. It delivers that flush without looking so overly vibrant. So I do really love this shade, and I could, just place it here, and, much like the Chanel shade, is going to give you that color, but lightly. You can blend it and kind of dial the intensity to your liking. If you don't want so much, you most definitely can use a fluffier brush, or you can buff it down. This is my Sonia G Kiyaki Smooth Buffer. If you want less color, I don't have any product on the brush. I'm just taking it around for a ride, so we could smooth that out. Will I still use the Chanel palette more? Probably. As much as I do love this palette, 100%. I don't know what it is. I adore the fact that I have 3 of the matte finishes, the matte bake finishes, and 1 highlight versus 2 highlights. I think I'm more likely to use more than 1 matte blush color to create beautiful gradients than I am with shimmer highlighters to create a gradient, since texture is something I consider. Depending on the formula, it could look a little, cray lower here on the cheeks. And with this formula, not that it's not chunky, most definitely, but for me to wear this shade, I will have to apply it lower. And I'd rather apply a powder blush that's in this finish instead of this here to create something on the apples of my cheeks. That's it. That's it. Another comparison I wanted to present is the NARS Rising Cheek Rising Star cheek palette. These might look similar. Well, let's see. This is, I think, their Bordeaux shade compared to, I'm going to put it right next to the Chanel one. That's a little more wine-ish in color. And here, where, I guess I would compare it. Well, I'm definitely going to pick this one up too. This, I feel, is not going to look the same as the peach from Chanel, right? That's like more of a coral. This shade here, that's like more of like a mauve, where from the Chanel palette, giving me a little bit more. This is giving me a little bit more than the NARS. And the highlight, this shade was a little strange because it's soft, for sure. It didn't have the same impact, or it doesn't, I should say. Let me put it between here. So it has a stronger background of color because it doesn't actually look, or I wouldn't use this as an actual highlight since it's a little dark. It has like a mauve, what is the word I'm trying to find? It has like a mauve undertone in the ground color, the ground level color, where if I apply this high, you can kind of see a shadow. So that's the tricky thing about this palette. And of course, accompanied by the cooler pink shades. You know, you will have to maneuver well with these shades. I think you can combine these well and these well. You kind of have to play with it. More of a consistent flow of color and undertone, I think, found in the Chanel palettes versus the NARS. Now, again, as I mentioned, from the Christian Dior palette, not a blush palette. This is an eyeshadow palette. We have a mixture of mattes, satins, and shimmers in here. On this side, you have all the matte shades, and from the triangles on to this side, you have a mixture of satin and shimmer. Here's the thing though, because these are eyeshadows, you do have to go in lightly on your face, because if you don't, it's going to be a lot to blend, a lot to work through. Maybe it will appear too intensely, again, because these are not meant to be worn on your cheeks, but it can be done. You have to choose the right brush, maybe choose the right foundation, maybe set your foundation, because if your foundation is still a little wet when you apply these powders on your skin, it's going to catch and adhere and just look like it's going to look like a lot. Very splotchy. We don't want that. The highlighter, the shimmers, and the satin shades, I think, again, meant to be placed on the eyes, but I think could just have a beautiful overlay effect on the higher points of the cheeks, especially this shade here, the weakest shade out of the palette for sure, as it's more opalescent, and I think more noticeable if you place it on a larger portion of your face. So that's going to give more of a soft focus effect versus a high shine reflected effect that you find in the Charlotte Tilbury and also the Chanel palettes. But I kind of like, one of you had mentioned that you appreciate just the more low-key finish of these formulas, especially if you choose to wear on your face. It doesn't grab texture. It looks more soft. It appears more soft, but still delivers that beautiful highlight effect. And lastly, I do have the Hourglass palette. I would say the advantage the Hourglass palette has for me is the inclusion of face powders that I can use to set my under eye concealer with and also to finish the rest of my face with. In addition, you have the highlight, the two blushes, and the bronzer. Although the Chanel palettes do not have a bronzer color, I do love to rely on blushes to create more of a sculpt, more of like that sunburnt look, especially with shades that, again, you have the red in here, you could easily create that. I find myself reaching towards or packing my Hourglass palette because if I really wanted to downsize the amount of makeup I wanted to put in my bag, I could just pack this palette and be done. In terms of formula comparisons, these are also baked, very light, very airy, and these do leave behind a little bit of sheen. This gold color, let me compare it to the Chanel gold here. So where is it? We got it here. I'm going to place it right under. So a little, I can see it better here from the angle. The Hourglass is a little lighter than Chanel. Most definitely. So this is more of like a golden champagne, right? And these colors, rosier, a little cooler overall, yeah? So you can see compared to the Chanel, to the Chanel colors, more pinky, even from the first palette, right? This is a lot more warm, that peach shade. Even the taupey, I keep saying taupey, that is not taupe. I guess like a very light tan brown. Definitely more rosier in nature. I guess I should get the elephant palette, shouldn't I? Okay. Now this is giving marble, okay? You have the marbleized highlighter, the marbleized blush. One of my most favorite blush colors ever, because this is such a beautiful, like, soft rose. You know what I mean? It might not look like anything on the swatch, but when you apply this on your face, it has just a lovely tone to the color. It's not too pink, not too red rose. It's just right smack down in the middle. The copper shades definitely don't exist in the Chanel palette, 100%. These stand on their own. I do love to apply these shades lower here. They deliver like that more burnt, sun-kissed vibe, especially when I layer them. It's a look. I cannot wait to get back into this in the summertime. I could get into it now. Who am I kidding? But if I wanted like that warm, just like toasted vibe on the face, heck, this would be beautiful with the Dior palette. Exclusively kept these shadows on the eyes and didn't place them on my face. And then, no, I would not do that. I would most 100% apply this shade here with the coppers. Are you kidding me? That will be a fantastic combination. In terms of packing, however, I would need to bring along my little Pat McGrath under eye blurring powder, you know, at least just to set this. The rest of my face, I haven't been setting much because the weather is crazy, first of all, and my foundation sets pretty well on its own, but I do understand if I needed to take that step, I could pack, you know, this one instead, or maybe just pack a foundation that has more of a set like the Hourglass Ambient Soft Glow. I think, you know, with this palette and then with the Dior palette, ooh, what a combination. Fifth! And overall, the looks will just be like reddish, pinkish, copperish. Maybe that should be a video. It'll be a close friends video for sure, but you know, it's on the queue. And that is it. The Chanel eye and face palettes. Just wanted to hop on here and elaborate further on them, my experience with them, and then also present the comparisons that I included in this video. Let me know down below, fam. Do you have the Chanel palettes? Are they on your radar? If you feel you are perfectly happy with the face palettes you have in your collection, do let me know. And I would also love to know your own observations, of course, with all this makeup that we have. Definitely 100% recommend the Chanel palette, especially if you were worried about the fragrance. There's no fragrance in these palettes. I was thrilled, and I do think across the board, even before when these palettes released, that Chanel blush shades are just one of the most beautiful shades ever in the makeup world. I know that's saying a lot, especially for someone who doesn't have a lot of Chanel blushes. Hear me out on this. From swatching them in store, just seeing, it's hard to find shades that are done by Chanel Beauty. Yes, which I understand why people just bite the bullet and get an expensive single like Chanel blush ones are. But I'm so happy that I waited for these palettes, because now I can have like the full-on Chanel blush experience times 1,000, not only for cheek but for eyes as well. It's a party and I don't want to leave. I'll see you down in those comments, fam, and until then, that is a wrap. Thank you all so much for watching. I hope this video helped, and if you like this video, please give it a thumbs up or maybe consider subscribing to my channel. And until then, I will see you on here again with another review tutorial, Chanel Blush Extravaganza, or monthly faves. Take care, and I will see you again soon.